Thank you so much, Irene. I'm Rose Maruru, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of EPIC Africa. And we're often asked what EPIC means. EPIC means enhancing philanthropic impact in Africa, of course. Just a little background as to the motivation behind EPIC. So it's really what EPIC was actually really born out of lived experience, working both in global and African civil society and philanthropy, and observing and experiencing firsthand many of the challenges in the sector. If you think of this space as a market, there are many market failures. The key one, of course, for us was the asymmetry of information, but also just the barriers to entry. Like if you're a new CSO, how do you get funding, and the lack of knowledge, services, really no infrastructure to support this sector. When sometimes people ask me what we do, I like to use the analogy of or the contrast of our sector and the business sector. And with the business sector, if you want to invest in, you have money that you want to invest and you're looking for investment opportunities, there's a whole slew of resources that you can refer to, World Bank doing ease of doing business, their government statistics and projections. I mean, there's a whole knowledge base. The institutions, from the Chamber of Commerce to association of you name it, to all these, kind of industry associations, lawyers who specialize just on the business sector. If you want to invest in the social sector, you're on your own, basically. You don't even know, what are the opportunities? Who are the organizations that exist that I can invest in? What do they do? So really feeling this gap is what motivated the establishment of EPIC Africa, specifically to try and help to fill one of the key gaps of fundamental gaps, which is knowledge, data, and knowledge of, like I said, just who's who exists, what do they do, where do they do it, with whom, how are they funded, and just really to start to understand this sector. So we set ourselves the impossible task of beginning to map the sector and to develop a robust kind of a hub of data and knowledge. So 2 years ago, we launched the African CSO platform. And if my colleagues are here, I think they can put the link on the chat, with the goal of beginning to have kind of a central hub for data and information for those that are looking to connect or learn about African civil society for whatever purpose. It could be funding, so funders come there. There are also other stakeholders who are interested in the sector, journalists who would like to interview a CSO on a particular issue, but they don't know who should they go to, et cetera, et cetera. The platform also is a space for CSOs to access resources. So we share funding opportunities, training opportunities, conferences, and CSOs themselves can, also share content. So they can also share opportunities. If they have a job they want to advertise, come and advertise there. Because again, if we don't have any specialized sort of outlets like that, CSOs can also write articles, and we have a couple of really active CSOs that constantly are creating and sharing content about their work and other things. So that's on one level. As the second level is, of course, the data that we've been collecting, and we have just shy of 4,000 organizations in our database now from 47 countries. And so we've started to, what can we learn from this data? So it's not data for the sake of it, but it's the insights that data can enable to inform, policy, practice, et cetera, et cetera. And actually what I'm going to be talking about today or presenting today is one data point that we have been collecting, and it's the question of who are your top sources of funding? So we do these surveys and mappings of civil society organizations. Sometimes we initiate them ourselves. Sometimes we are commissioned by a funder to help them identify potential partners and understand the landscape. And so we asked this one question: who are your top 4 sources of funding? I don't know why we said 4, could be 3 sources of funding. And, we give a selection of everything from, individuals, bilaterals, multilaterals, foundations, local foundations, foreign foundations, etc. And invariably in now, at least of the time of what I'm going to be presenting, we had 4 large surveys. Two of the last ones had over 1,000 respondents from over 40 countries. And invariably, we see that organizations indicate that individuals are among their top 3, in fact, sources of funding. And for a significant number, it's often individuals are the top source of funding, followed usually by INGOs. So they sort of interchange. And when we first saw that data point, we were like, that's interesting, but kind of strange. Are you sure there's no glitch? Because that's not the narrative we have, right? The narrative is that, African CSOs are overwhelmingly, if not entirely, reliant on external funding sources. So already that data point was challenging, to that notion that that's how we actually funded. So we decided to unpack, this, 4 surveys to actually begin to see who are these organizations who are saying that they are getting individual funding. What thematic areas do they work in? Are they the big ones? Are they the small ones? What countries are they located in? What's the nature of their work? Are they doing service delivery? What are they doing actually? Is there a sector that seems to attract, more individual funders than another, et cetera, et cetera? So we, to our surprise, we actually found that these organizations that are reporting or that reported individual giving were coming from all sectors, really. Obviously, health, education were leading, but they're also working on issues of women's rights, issues of human rights, climate change, you name it. It's a variety. Now, obviously, 65. Irene, were you going to share the PowerPoint or not?
Do you like us to share, or do you like to share?
Yeah. Why don't you share it? Just maybe like from the second slide. So, next slide. Yes. So why did we choose to focus on this? I mean, obviously it was an intriguing data point that clearly jumped at us because it was challenging stories that we have been sort of accustomed to about who funds our organizations. And so we wanted to tell this amazing story, which we think is really empowering and which somehow we know, but somehow we don't know. And that's that, we have been in charge of our development for a very long time, right? And so we saw that so there are all these myths, and I won't go through all of them. So there's the myth that individual giving in Africa is insignificant and less impactful than the kind of, aid or giving or grants that we receive from outside, that Africans primarily give informally and primarily to family and friends. That's another very popular myth, that we don't give to development institutions. We might give to the church, to my mosque, or some other religious institutions, but that we don't give to particularly systemic issues. There's another myth that individual giving is localized and reactive in nature, that, we will respond to floods, we will respond to a famine, but we are not funding, so-called, systemic issues. That external funding displaces individual giving. That's another myth, that if you are getting donations from, bilateral funders or formal foundations, that individual will not give to your organization. Actually, we saw that that's not the case. And then there's also this myth about, diaspora giving, which is, seen as one-dimensional, but it's much more complex. And finally, it was a myth around that African CSOs are overwhelmingly reliant on foreign funding. I think I already mentioned that. So, the respondents for this study was 1,027 organizations that responded to this particular study, which was carried out in 2021, which was actually looking at the impact of COVID on African CSOs. And this was one of the questions that we asked about sources of funding. And this came from, 46 countries. But the particular organization that, responded to the question were 838 organizations. And what did they say? So clearly, the individual donations and well, 53% of the organizations reported individual donations. So you can see actually it is the leading source here, followed by international NGOs, international foundations, community-generated funds, bilateral and multilateral agencies, private sector, local private foundation, and governments. And it's interesting here, if you look at the bilateral, which only 25% of organizations indicated were funding them, which tells us that, yes, there were many African organizations that benefited from USAID funding, but very few of them were getting that money directly or getting really very significant, funding. What else did we find out? That if you add other forms of individual giving, which would be, like membership fees, community-generated funds, and sometimes the founder, the board, they give, but so for some reason they didn't consider that as an individual giving. But when you add those so-called personal sources as well as community-generated fund, actually the total jumps from 53% of organizations saying that individual giving is among the top, 3 sources of funding to 65%. So now, these individuals contribute, like I said, to a variety of issues. Of course, we see the community development, education, health, but we also see gender, human rights, youth, children, democracy and governance, et cetera, et cetera. And also that they're supporting a variety of type of activities, so advocacy. And in fact, we see that a big majority, 67%, actually engage in advocacy. Another 32% are engaged in organizing and mobilizing. And in fact, service deliveries, only 30% of the organization who said that they're involved in service delivery. Quite interesting in terms of how, again, myth. Another interesting finding was that as high as 70% of CSOs receiving individual gifts are more than 5 years old. And so what we took away from this is that trust plays a role. So we're not seeing very new organizations getting a lot of individual funding. 50% of these organizations are at that point had under $100,000 budget a year. So again, size didn't seem to matter. Both small organizations as well as bigger organizations reported significant individual giving. So I know I don't have much time, so maybe I'll skip to, so what did we take away from all of, excuse, yes, yes, that's what I'm gonna do. And what I wanted to focus on was, okay, so we present all of this, so what? Okay, so we know that, so what? And for us, the so what is not just, unpacking and challenging the myths, but the so what of what do we do with this knowledge now? And for us, we have a few recommendations or where we think this could lead, and obviously they're there are opportunities, and one of those opportunities to really, we need to understand more this phenomena of individual giving. Who's giving? How much are they giving? When are they giving? And the whole idea behind that is then, as a sector, we can be better prepared, have the tools to actually leverage this generosity that we know exists in Africa. The other thing is, we need to strengthen the philanthropic infrastructure so that it can support individual giving, including, for example, favorable tax and regulatory frameworks where people get a tax break, or corporates get a tax break to if they're funding social impact. And of course, continue enthusiastically to reframe narratives around African philanthropy. And the final one, I mean, there are many others, and I will share the report so you can see all the rest of them. But I think, it's really, I think ultimately that I think we have a chance. This US government and other governments funding cuts are really, sad as they are, and they're affecting real communities, not just organizations, real people, is I think we have an opportunity to leapfrog, right? And really look at how do we even leverage technology to grow individual giving and other types of local giving, and really cultivate a very, African individual giving journey. So for us, we're optimistic. Yeah, it's a difficult moment, but we think the future could be something that we haven't even perhaps begun to imagine, and hopefully we can imagine together. Thank you, Irene. Sorry, I went on too long.